pensioners are going to be forced to answer 243 questions in order to receive pension credit, which actually enables them to continue to receive their winter fuel payments. So they're making it as difficult as they possibly can to try and penny pinch. Now, also in the European Union, because of the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson signed when we actually left the EU, if you are a pensioner that's living in the European Union or in Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, you get the winter fuel payment regardless. So if you're a pensioner in this country that can't get yourself through the myriad of forms required to sign up for pension credit, you can actually go live in the European Union and get it regardless. I mean, how perverse is that? It's absolutely deranged. So I was thinking about this, and then I saw this really fantastic meme. And it's a load of pensioners in a small boat getting themselves to France to bin their passports and actually get a nice warm bit of, well, the sunshine, presumably in France for now at least, and their winter fuel payments. So there they all are. And of course, this comes at a time when Ed Miliband pledged 11.6 billion quid of taxpayer cash on overseas climate aid. So we're sending all this money abroad. Pensioners in the EU will still get their winter fuel payments. But if you're a poor old pensioner that would quite like to live out the rest of their twilight years in Blighty, well, you're up Pooh Creek without a paddle. I just find the whole thing utterly absurd. So this made me laugh, but you cannot make it all up. It is absolutely bizarre. I mean, Chloe, where are you at on all of this? Because, you know, we are fiscal conservatives. We believe in restraint on the public purse. But I just think that this is fleecing from pensioners in order to send money abroad so that Sir Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband can look like nice little globalists on the international stage.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like our priorities at the moment are completely in the wrong place. I mean, I'd be interested to see if this policy, as you've shown us, that you'll get your winter fuel payments if you live in the EU. I wonder if that was just a bit of a mistake and a hiccup and a bit of an oversight, or if that is genuinely what they want to do to starve the Brits of their winter fuel allowances, but then give people who have gone off to live in nice sunny Spain or wherever where they probably don't need as much heating. They'll probably
they'll get it regardless.
I know it just seems really, really odd, and I think people are so fed up of seeing that Brits are not put first. Like, there are plenty of people that think we should do some stuff to help people abroad and whatnot, but I think that most of us can agree from a moral perspective that at least putting the people in your country first makes sense. If you've got pensioners that are choosing between heating and eating, there is absolutely no justification whatsoever for sending 11.6 billion quid in overseas climate aid. It just is completely and utterly wrong. It's disgusting. I think that they should be ashamed of themselves.
Yes. And I mean, Nicholas, the question for me here is, would we really expect the likes of, I don't know, countries around the world, like China is the biggest polluter on earth, would we really expect them to fund us in climate change damage when, for example, we start to have erosion of certain cliff areas and some stuff like that they inevitably will blame on climate change, apocalyptic as it may be to these people, especially Ed Miliband. He very much is the high priest of all of this activism. But me, it seems absolutely preposterous that they're closing off North Sea oil and gas, so we don't have any form of domestic resilience when it comes to energy security. At the same time, they're taking away this winter fuel payment from pensioners just to send billions abroad. You know, that it does not make sense at all. In fact, it seems incredibly cruel to me and quite deliberate.
Well, it is incredibly cruel. Last night I was having dinner with my grandparents, and they were telling me about how they had their winter fuel payments stripped away from them, despite the fact they're hardworking people. My grandfather is 89 and my grandma is 85, and yet for
Mm,
some reason the government doesn't think they're worthy of receiving fuel assistance. And many of their friends who are in their 90s have had the same thing happen to them. And in fact, they were discussing cutting back on food over the winter so they can actually afford to heat their homes. And some of their neighbours are going through even more desperate times right now. So
yeah.
I think, honestly, this is a prioritisation of Britain's global image other than its own people. I mean, the fact
Yes.
of the matter is that if you can afford to live in Spain, I think you can afford to, heat your home, or Liechtenstein, which is the richest country in the world. It's utterly, utterly, utterly ridiculous, and just demonstrates that this Labour government doesn't have the best interests of the British people at heart. Labour is not the party of the workers or the party of anybody anymore. It's the party of the non-tax paying foreigners and the global elite. And there is a lot of anger and a lot of rage
Oh,
in
yeah.
the area where I am right now. Tremendous amounts of rage, because these are people who are hardworking folks that we have, my grandparents, they have a Labour MP. They have a Labour MP, and I doubt she's going to be answering any questions at the next meeting with her constituents. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, Wild in the Woods on YouTube says all world aid needs reviewed. I think I think I would agree with that. I think much of our international aid is indeed wasted. And Sharon on X says that she's a pensioner and she's considering going off to live in the EU. I mean, perhaps that's Keir Starmer's plan, Chloe. Perhaps he just wants all these pensioners to go off live in the EU so he doesn't have to deal with pesky Conservative voters anymore.
Well, I mean, maybe that is the solution to the migrant problem, is rather than try to reduce the numbers coming in, just massively increase the numbers going out, push all of the Brits out of the country so that we've got enough homes and enough infrastructure to cope for the millions of people coming in. Maybe that's his plan.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole thing is absurd, but it's having real
Yeah.
effects as well on domestic politics because, well, one, the pensioners are absolutely livid. Many of them are. And there are many, many pensioners who don't know that they are eligible to receive pension credit, which actually enables them to get the winter fuel payment. So there are going to be so many people that struggle this winter, perhaps without actually realising that they could have been eligible for taxpayer support. But as I say, I mean, that £11.6 billion pledge, absolutely, it makes me so livid because it will just be wasted. You know, I can remember at one point we were giving money to China in foreign aid in order to help Chinese, it was something like farmers or something to that effect, actually cut their salt intake. So the idea that this money, £11.6 billion, isn't going to be wasted, we're probably going to hand it over to India and China, which do have space programs and aren't countries that I would argue are obvious recipients of foreign aid, if there are indeed any that come to mind straight away. But Starmer's approval rating, the old government, so Rishi Sunak's government, ended its life on 71% disapproval. But in the 50-odd days it's been in office, Sir Keir Starmer's government has already dropped to 51% disapproval, with only 23% actually approving of it. So you see the trajectory at which it took the Conservative government to actually get to those kinds of levels. And let's not forget they were in power for 14 years. And already Sir Keir Starmer's government is reaching those kinds of levels of disapproval. So it would seem to me that there are consequences for this kind of action. And I don't think anyone's buying at a time when, you know, they're telling us all we need to start buttoning up and being a little bit more responsible with our money and all the rest of it. They're wasting all this cash abroad. I don't think anyone's buying it. I don't think anyone can actually see that they are cutting the right things and instead going after those who, I would argue, need it most, and those who built this country to what it is today that we should be immensely grateful for. Pensioners wouldn't be my first priority for those kinds of cuts. So, I mean, Chloe, do you think that ultimately he may look back on this in 4 years' time, if he doesn't U-turn on it, that is, But he may look back on it in 4 years' time or however long it takes for him to call a general election and think, bloody hell, I wish we hadn't done that.
Yeah, he could massively regret it. I mean, it would be interesting to see from some, proper, more professional pollsters than me how much they think that it would affect their electoral results, given that pensioners are ones that we would sort of typically expect to be more likely to vote Conservative. So it might have been that Labour chose to make cuts in that area because they thought, they're not really our voter base anyway. We can disregard them how we want. As much as I think that that's immoral and disgusting, you can kind of understand the logic there. But I think that the Keir Starmer honeymoon period really did not last long at all.
No.
I think all of us on our side, we saw before the election, we saw through the facade that the Labour Party was painting of this merry land where, the NHS is going to be fixed, education is going to be fixed, everything is going to be fixed, we're going to have money for everything, right? Like they tried to make people think. We could see through that, but I think that most of us thought that they would wait a little bit to slowly ease in the bad, unpopular policies. But they just went straight for it. I mean, sort of literally the first day after the general election, Rachel Reeves then puts out a statement saying, I've looked at the finances. There's no money to do any of the stuff that we said that we were going to do. I mean, making excuses for herself and pretending it's not her fault. But they did not wait to basically say, actually, we're going to raise your taxes and we're not going to have any money for anything.
Yes, exactly. And Nicholas, I guess they would argue that actually getting the pain out of the way first so that people forget about it by the time 4 years comes around, that's probably sensible politics. But ultimately, I guess they're also banking on the fact that pensioners in Britain overwhelmingly vote Conservative or Reform indeed, and don't want anything at all to do with the Labour Party anyway.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that, in the sense of your opinion of what Starmer is attempting to do here. However, I will admit we've gone a long way from stay at home to save grandma to grandma can freeze to death in her home over the winter. And I think this just demonstrates that Labour really just doesn't really care about the vast majority of voters in this country. The fact they're willing to throw pensioners under the bus like this within the first couple of weeks of their government, we have another 5 years left of this. What are they going to do? And I'll tell you right now, people are going to remember this. People are very much going to remember this. Labour are banking on the electorate having a short-term memory. Well, during the election, we still had issues of COVID come up 4 years ago. And a lot of people voted for Reform UK because they were very, very, very angry at what had happened during the lockdowns, the mass transference of wealth, the impact it had on our children, the impact it had on the NHS. And I think this also goes to show, because Labour, of course, and especially the Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer had access to figures that the public didn't from the Treasury during the election. I think it just goes to show that Labour were completely disingenuous during the election. They lied through their teeth.
Yeah.
I mean, my auntie works in a hospital up here. She works for the NHS, and she's telling me all these horror stories in the last couple of weeks alone. No beds available, nothing. And yet, for some reason, the government can afford to have 5,000 hotel rooms on standby for illegal migrants on the taxpayer dime.
Yeah.
It is a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah. Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk, and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.